You got this FTC potential news.
Yeah.
You got this fine over Google over at the EU, first big one out of their new privacy laws. Is this amounting to a bit of a wake-up call this year?
Well, I don't know. You know, they've paid fines before, and obviously, as you know, Facebook signed a deal with the FTC many, many years ago, which that's under question of whether they were following it. So this is probably a follow-on to that. These fines aren't very big. I mean, the EU has put in some larger fines, but the ones in the U.S. are relatively small. I think 22, 30 million, something like that, which isn't very much for these companies. And so the question is not just that can they put fines into place, but can they make proper regulation? As you know, we've talked about that a lot, to keep these companies in line, and if they will at all, which is, I think, is a big if.
Right, and then you got other reports suggesting that, well, maybe Google is considering with pulling Google News out of Europe. I mean, how much do you think happens tactically in terms of operations at some of these companies?
Well, I mean, if they have to, they will do that. You know, this right to be forgotten thing is also there in Europe, and there's all kinds of difficult things for them to implement there. Now, some of these laws would never come to, like the right to be forgotten in the United States, I don't think it would ever be passed in any way. But I think it's very difficult when you're operating on a global scale with all these very different governments and very different thoughts about how privacy should be conducted. And so Google's going to have to make changes and decide what it's going to do to its businesses based on what it can do. I can't imagine they'll move Google News out of Europe, but maybe they will. Maybe they feel it's too hard to implement. We'll see as they move forward. They'll make that decision, that business decision. But in general, I think you're going to see a lot tougher fines and regulations starting out of Europe, maybe being in a lot of the states here in this country, like California. And then we'll see if there's any federal movement. I don't anticipate it, given how badly we can't even get the government open. So I can't imagine they're going to take up major privacy legislation anytime soon.
Kara, the term that Mark Benioff used was a crisis of trust. Certainly that's a conversation we've had on this show quite a few times over the past year plus. But are there any signs that consumers actually see this as a crisis of trust?
Well, I think people do talk about Facebook in a different way. I don't think it's just the media and you know, the sort of the digerati talk about it. I think people generally, I have lots of relatives who use it, and they're distrustful of it. You know, they've heard the stories, they understand, you know, the basic outlines. I don't think they're paying attention the way we are. But it's definitely not the same Facebook, sort of this upswing, celebrity cover, aren't they fantastic kind of thing. And so I think they've endured some hit to their reputation, and that always has some fallout to the business. But as I've said before, the real issue is whether they can make innovative products that people want to use. And if they do, they will be fine. If they don't, they will not be fine. And that's pretty much the formula for all Silicon Valley or tech companies.
Yeah, and Kara, I wonder about that innovative product that customers want to use if you consider the customers to be the advertisers. It just seems as if beyond the cost of having to police the privacy issues and everything on the consumer-facing front, Facebook has always had this magical ad targeting machine, and we're not going to tell you exactly how it works, but it really works well. Has that changed at all?
Well, they're going to have to be transparent for parts of it, like the political parts and things like that. I think, you know, I think the issue is advertisers will go where the audience is, and this is where the audience is right now. And people can regain trust. Look at Microsoft. If you remember how much we considered them sort of this giant evil corporation, and now under Satya Nadella, their reputation is quite good. So people can recover from those things. I think it all focuses around product and whether people like to use Facebook. Or it becomes more onerous. I find it really difficult to use anymore. It's so big and bloated. But to me, but others may not think that. And so that's really where, you know, if advertisers get the product they want and reach the audiences they want and users like it, it'll be fine. If not, it won't be fine.
You know, one other angle of this ongoing debate about privacy in our country, at least, involves Jeff Bezos and the circumstances surrounding his divorce and these texts. You wrote about this last week. Does it change the calculus, especially for a man who you would think would understand data privacy better than anyone?
Well, in his case, I think someone took a picture of them. One of the two people who had the text took a picture of it, or something like that happened. I was talking more of the context is that anything goes on the internet now, and so everything is available. And so one of the things that's my whole point was that we become so used to having full information that some of the information is information we shouldn't have. And I think the question is how we think about privacy and what should be private, even within our public discourse, what should stay quiet and what shouldn't stay quiet. And I think that's a big issue. And I think someone like Jeff Bezos should, you know, I'd be very careful if I were him compared to other people. because of who he is. And he's got to understand that maybe he understands a little better like what many people, regular people, endure around privacy and what people know about them. You know, I shopped there this weekend and I was thinking he has so much information about me. I kept thinking it the whole time. Me and my kids were talking about it when we were in Whole Foods. So I think it's just something to pause and think about, is how we conduct ourselves publicly, what should be private, and also whether we need a really stronger privacy protections for consumers. I think that's definitely the case.